The LGA 775 socket board was some of the most long-standing and well-developed processors to date, but now they're incredibly affordable, with it costing just 20p for a dual core. Today we have this Pentium Dual Core E5300, which we bought for just 20p. The Pentium itself is based on the 45nm Wolfdale architecture and is very similar to that of a Core 2 Duo, but features a reduced L2 cache of 2MB. It has two cores which run at 2.6 GHz and a TDP of 65 watts, so it doesn't run too hot. It originally retailed for a regular retail price of £65, which for those of you in America is $70. This is of course when it was released in Q3 of 2008. But this may sound pretty damn good on paper, especially for its retail price today, and don't get me wrong, it is very nice, but we want to see how it performs. So we're going to be pairing it with our AMD Radeon R9 285, 4GB of DDR2 800MHz RAM, and once again our usual Gigabyte LGA 775 motherboard. The chip itself works on most LGA 775 motherboards, provided they are the later ones or early ones with the BIOS update, and this is the very low end boards. I mean, a lot of them do support this processor. And you can purchase those older or lower end boards for around £10, even cheaper if you actually keep your eye out for some deals. But no matter how good this chip already seems, it gets even better. The chip is recorded to hit 3 GHz on even the weakest of boards, a modest step up over its stock clock speeds, and considering the IPC isn't too bad on these chips, it should fare pretty damn well if it does. Our operating system of choice is Windows 7 64-bit, as it's probably the best pairing for these components in terms of driver support, etc, etc. But really, any version of Windows would probably work completely fine, and if you've been watching this channel a lot, you know we usually use Windows 7, but I'm eager to try out different versions if that's what you'd like to see. But we'll now go on with setting this up and overclocking it. We went with a relatively safe and stable 1.3 volts and a nice 3.2 GHz overclock, which seemed to work fine when it came to booting up to Windows. The next step of course was to wait while Prime 95 was left running so we could make sure the temps didn't get too high or the PC became unstable. Waiting was helped by making a cup of tea and, well, just waiting. I mean, you can get up to whatever you like to do, but personally relaxing with a cup of tea is always my favourite choice. Finally, with that done, we decided to get a few basic tests done. General usage was perfect, programs were quick to open, and general tasks such as web browsing were way more than possible. Typing text into a word processor was fluent with no slowdowns as expected, and in general it just worked well. Video playback was flawless, with anything up to 1080p working incredibly well. Even with the stock or overclock speeds, I noticed this processor was more than capable to handle daily office or home tasks. Although a tiny bit slow when playing 60fps content, it was nothing that I needed to worry about. So for work in just an office PC, it is way more than adequate. However, we want to see how it handles some gaming. Up first with Grand Theft Auto 5, which is a fairly advanced game to say the least, but scales incredibly well with older hardware. Averages saw the game run at 26 frames per second, and minimums hit 17 frames per second when the game got tough. This was with the low settings and the 720p resolution, and as you can imagine, it's not entirely unplayable, as dips weren't too large for the majority of gameplay, and it did stay above 30fps when the game was quieter, as a lot of it is. Really though, it was very similar to that of the PS3 console, which ran GTA 5 with dips down into the low 20s quite regularly, but you'd have to lower some settings a bit more in the INI file, as we've seen in my GTA 5 tweaks video, to up that FPS to something a bit more stable. Next up is CSGO, which is running here with medium and high settings in the 1080p resolution. It gave us returns at 41 frames per second on average, and lows down to 32 frames per second when the game got very heavy. This was more than playable though, as unless you were seeking a very competitive experience, I'd recommend looking for something a bit more advanced than a 20p processor. Of course, this includes the later Core 2 Duos or even a basic Core 2 Quad. The game is CPU bottlenecked, and dropping a resolution didn't give us any increases here, but still, I'd consider this be a great feat and incredibly playable for a 20p processor. Skyrim ran great with averages of 51 FPS and the high options selected. This was 2x MSAA enabled in the 1080p resolution. The heaviest hitting parts such as towns and villages hardly caused any issues for our CPU, with it dipping down to 31 FPS when you were looking into the distance. This is due to the draw distance being set to the max on the preset selected. Lowering this would reduce the drop, however staying above 30 FPS looks great in motion, and for the 20p price point I'm very happy with this. Another Bethesda title up next with Fallout 4, a test which showed newer titles will be an issue, as processors with higher core count and IPC have been storming the market recently, leaving older CPUs like this redundant. We ran it with low settings in the 1080p resolution as the CPU was a bottleneck, so resolution didn't make much of a difference no matter what it was set to. And well, quieter areas returned us with quite a playable experience for sure, but busier areas pulled this average down to around 27 FPS, with lows of 15 FPS in the heat of combat and surrounded with a lot of heavy effects, really just ruining the playability when you get further into the game. Of course, this doesn't mention the stuttering that occurred due to the lows of 15 FPS just being so distant from that 27 FPS. Finally, we tested an older title like Half-Life 2, which is where the CPU really shines. In 1080p with high settings enabled, 2x MSAA on and HDR also on, we saw averages of 142 frames per second, minimums down to 80 frames per second at the very worst of times. So older titles will look and run great on this processor, and for 20p this would be an amazing piece of tech for those that want to play games up to Skyrim on all those precursing AAA titles. As for a recording test, we ran OBS with a 1080p base, a 12,000 bitrate and AMD VC transcoding on. This is of course with a 60 FPS capture target which the CPU was able to power through fine in those older titles, but newer ones would definitely cause an FPS drop in game if not capturing issues with your recording. Streaming wise was definitely a struggle for the CPU by itself, as x264 recording is still very intensive. We were able to achieve a solid 30 FPS recording with the 1500 bitrate in the 720p resolution. Sure, it's not pretty, but for a 20p CPU this was the best we were able to get while still retaining a HD resolution. Upping the bitrate in any way would destroy gaming performance and cause the recording to become a stuttering mess. So for streaming older titles, these are definitely feasible for the CPU, but do watch out in some of the more intensive ones. But most importantly, should you buy it? Well, for testing out motherboards it is brilliant. You can test their overclocking functionality and just how well they work. I've learned a thing or two about my own Gigabyte board that I purchased for a couple of quid and it is amazing. I wouldn't have known them if it wasn't for that CPU. It's really given me a run for its money. However, here we have, in older games it works amazingly well with blisteringly high frame rates as well as being able to hold its own in some of those newer AAA titles. However, do consider that you will be stuck at 30 FPS in those games with some dips into the high or mid 20s. But in real world gaming on the LGA 775 socket, please go for either a high-end Core 2 Duo which will overclock even better and have a higher single core performance thanks to that increased L2 cache, or even a weak Core 2 Quad, as those extra cores will just push you over the threshold of playability in those newer titles. Thank you very much for watching this Budget Builds episode. Good night! And thank you very much to all the subscribers. I swear it just keeps growing every time I look at it, it's amazing. At the end of this episode, I'd also like to give a special thank you to all our Patreons, Alex, Stephen and Tony, and a very belated thank you to RetroTech100, who gave my channel an amazing recommendation. His channel is linked down below in the description so you guys can check him out too. He does some amazing content and I seriously recommend it. If you too would like to decide on the next videos or get pre-release footage, why not consider becoming a Patreon? Thank you once again, good night!